Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Webster, and just walking through the second half of your final project presentations. And so you should have gone up until the method, right? And so now you're going to transition from the method to the results. Yeah, just to reiterate, you are only turning in the second half here, right, for next week. But once you get your feedback on your um, right title, question reading, hook, intro method slides, a lot of different components there. Once you get feedback on those, if you want to revise those slides and turn them in with these slides, that's fantastic, right? If you make no changes to, the first half of your presentation, you can still include that in the PowerPoint that you upload. That's fine. Unless you tell me that you have revised your slides and you want me to take a look at them again, I'm going to go straight to the results slides, unless you tell me otherwise. Okay. All right. So results here. So I'm trying to equalize this across all the different articles here. I'm going to have each one of you create a bar graph of the main results. All right. So for the Adachi and Willoughby article, you're going to create a bar graph depicting the mean hot sauce aggression scores for each of the 4 video games, and for experiment 2, because you're only presenting experiment 2. Kleinsmith et al., the gun article, you're going to create a bar graph depicting the mean hot sauce aggression scores for the gun versus mousetrap conditions. And then DeWalt et al., you're going to create a bar graph depicting the mean hot sauce aggression scores for the donut and radish experimental conditions, the ego-depleted versus non-ego-depleted conditions for experiment 1, because you're only presenting experiment 1, right? So everyone, regardless of the article that you have, right, is sort of going to have a similar task in creating a bar graph depicting hot sauce scores, mean scores for 2 different conditions. Well, except for Adachi and Willoughby, you have 4 video games, so it'll be 4 different conditions. But regardless of the article that you have, you're going to create a simple bar graph. And so I have a YouTube video here for you. You can download, click that, watch it. It's about 5 minutes long. If you've never created a bar graph using Excel, I recommend doing this in Excel. The video will give you a helpful tutorial on creating a bar graph. It really is not very difficult, even if you haven't had much experience with Excel. All right. I will specify. Make sure the font. This is, I think, the problem that a lot of people have. Make sure the font is large enough for us to see in the video. Sometimes people have like 10 or 12 point size font in the bar graph, and it's very difficult to read on a computer screen or in the video. So make sure that font is large enough. You can manipulate the font. You can make it big. Make sure that we can see it as an audience. We're not squinting to see. Also, annotate your bar graph. So if you remember, especially like I know we just did the Milgram one, but the week beforehand we did the dehumanization article, right? And you saw how I sort of dissected tables and figures, right, for us to go through, step by step to better understand what those tables and figures were telling us. So I want you to do the same. Annotate your bar graph, put some text boxes, specify which if the mean scores are significantly different, give an explanation or comment. So don't just put the bar graph up. You need to explain both verbally and hopefully using annotations, explain what the audience are seeing. Explain to us what we are seeing. And so you're doing a pretty simple bar graph, so it's not going to be like overly complex or complicated, but you just, this is practice. This is learning how to go through, right? And make sure you know how to explain the results of a simple bar graph, right? Start out by being like, well, here we, what's on the y-axis, what's on the x-axis, go through step by step what we are seeing. Right? And then also, and this does not apply to the Adachi and Willoughby article though, because the hot sauce aggression scores are calculated a little bit different, so you can't exactly do this, which is unfortunate. But so if you're doing the Adachi and Willoughby article, you won't be able to do this, and you can explain in your results that it's very hard to do this because they create a standardized score of both the weight of the hot sauce as well as the spiciness of the hot sauce, and so that aggregated score it's hard to interpret in terms of like the other two articles, the Kleinsmith et al. And the D. Wall et al. Article. They actually provide the weight of the hot sauce. And so you can provide some context regarding how much hot sauce is being allocated to participants in each of the conditions, both in terms of the relative amounts and the conditions, as well as the difference between the two conditions, right? You should be able to contextualize that for us as the audience. And if you remember, we sort of did this in discussing the decibel level for the white noise paradigm. And so if you remember the Karate Kid, Gorillas in the Mist experiment that we talked about at the very beginning of the semester, right? We saw, we took a look at the difference in, white noise decibels for, the Karate Kid versus the Gorillas in the Mist video conditions. And we sort of picked apart, right? What exactly is 75 decibels compared to 70 decibels. It was a difference of 2.5 decibels is really 2.5, all that big of a difference. So you want to sort of emulate that discussion that we had, if you remember. And you can go back and take a look at that those lecture slides in order to maybe jog your memory about that. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. Right, and I guess the last thing I will say is that there are some supplemental results to all these articles, right? So the Adachi and Willoughby, there's some tables in there that sort of verify, right, the ratings of the video games as competitive versus violent. For Kleinsmith et al., right, there's some supplemental results about testosterone in the D. Wall et al. Article. There are some supplemental results, I think, about mood. Don't worry about talking about those results. You can, if you want to, integrate them in, but you aren't required to address those. I'm having you focus on the primary outcome here, which is the hot sauce. Right. Sorry, I just added a bullet point down there so that I make sure it's on the slide, because I know some people aren't going to watch this video. All right, so next we have the discussion. And so first, just summarize the results in 1 or 2 bullet points. I know you just went over the results, but try to, maybe in plainer language, just explain what the article showed in terms of the results, all right? I usually do this, right, in class, just sort of summarize, right? Because you just went through the bar graph, but just reiterate, try to reiterate, maybe in plainer language, what exactly the results show. Second, answer your question based on the evidence from your study, or really experiment. Everyone has experiments here. And so, remember your question, right, is about evil. So you need to define and apply the evil criteria. So we've done this exhaustively over the course of the entire semester, right? So be sure to list each criteria, indicate what decision you reached on each, and include succinct bullet points indicating how you reached your decision on each, right? So I usually have like 3 criteria and check boxes, and usually put check marks next to those that, the criteria that we've met. Usually we have a verbal discussion in class about, how whether or not we've met that criteria. And you don't necessarily need to do like a categorical distinction. You can sort of think about on a continuum if you want. But you need to talk about each of the criteria. You need to talk about the decision you reach, and you need to justify that decision. And you need to discuss at least two ways in which, in how the researchers could have better simulated evil. So, for example, in going back to the Gorillas in the Mist versus Karate Kid article, right, with the white noise paradigm, one of the main problems here is that participants are still playing a game, right? Um, Participants are still playing a game, and so you need to somehow account for the competitive nature of the game, right? So how do you know that it's really the intention here is really about hurting the other player and not really about winning? So how would you solve that, right? Or right, we don't, participants didn't know right beforehand. It didn't seem like participants knew uh, what exactly, right, is the difference between something that's 60 decibels versus, 100 and I forgot what the max was, 110 decibels or 120 decibels, right? So in order to make sure participants sort of know upfront what they're getting into and sort of to better address, the how harmful the white noise blasts actually are, right? To give that information to participants, right? Or have participants, experience a sample of 60 decibels versus, 110 or 120 decibels, right? So what can we change about the experiment to better simulate evil actions? In a right, this has to be within an ethical right. It has to these changes would have to be as would still meet the criteria for being ethical, right? Ethical enough, and that's the main concern is that it's ethical enough. Perhaps feasibility I'm less concerned about, but think about those things as you're talking about these changes that you would make to better simulate evil. Because the hot sauce paradigm, it's pretty good, but there are some really good changes that researchers could make, simple changes to make the paradigm even better simulate evil. Okay, the last major part of the second half is conclusion. So here is where you're going to wrap things up. Right, so collectively, given the study's results and limitations, how would you answer the question? So you're going to have a concise, sorry, this is being a little noisy in the background. You're going to have a concise but informative conclusion. So 2 to 3 bullet points here. And this should sound sort of like a soundbite at the end of a radio or TV interview. You have to be careful about now to overgeneralize or overreach in making conclusions, but you need to both summarize the results of the experiment that you presented and then also answer the question given the limitations that you talked about, and limitations in terms of the experiment better simulating, evil, right? So here's an example conclusion from the victim perp week, right? So if you remember back to, I think it was RQ2, DQ2, you read the Stillwell and Baumeister article. And so here, right, 3 bullet points here. A little bit more I think this is a little bit more complicated design here. So the bullet points, I think, are a little bit longer, but yeah. So, here undergraduates read and recounted a fictional story about one student breaking a promise to another from the perspective of either the perpetrator, right, the promise breaker, the oath breaker, from the victim, or they were given no role, right? And regardless of whether they took on the perpetrator or victim roles, participants distorted their recollections, right? They changed or just made up details to make themselves look better. And these biases persisted, right, even after 1 to 2 weeks. 1 to 2 weeks. Sorry, just type this up. Just gave myself a half hour to work on this. So 1 to 2 weeks persisted after 1 to 2 weeks, and even after asking participants to be as accurate as possible. Right? Remember, participants who didn't get any role, right, mirrored victim biases. Right? But the issue was, right, this story was fictional, right? And it was about a broken promise, right? And even though the story was relatable, right, it didn't really simulate evil. So we can reasonably assume that as actions become eviler, right, as the stakes get higher for both the perpetrators and the victims, right, the perpetrators have more to lose, and the victims, right, feel even more aggrieved and want justice. So both victims and perpetrators have their motivations and will likely distort, right, their stories up to a point. There's likely a point where actions become so excessive, perpetrators don't have any wiggle room left, that their explanations, justifications probably sound so absurd. So, and then outside observers may not help because they side with whoever is taking on the victim role. So that was answering the question, our question from RQ2, DQ2 about, you know, who do we trust more in terms of recounting, right, evil stories? Who do we collect? Who are going to trust to be more truthful? Right? That was the question. So that was the conclusion, and then you have your reference slides. So any references, and so of course you're going to, of course, cite the required reading here, but you may have integrated other references here. So just make sure, right, that you cite all your references here. And then draft deadline. So the draft of the results, discussion, conclusion, references slides will be due 11:59 p.m. Thursday, 11:14. And that's 20 points. And then you'll upload a practice video by 11:59 p.m. Thursday, 11:28. That's 10 points. And so I won't go into all this detail here. It's just information is in here. Uh, yeah, and that's I think that's where I will stop, because those are the assignments that are coming up next week, and then over Thanksgiving break you'll do the practice video. Yeah, I think that's where I'll stop here, and hopefully this was helpful. And good luck in working on the second half of your final projects.